In this video, we're going to cover dependents, specifically qualifying child. So, a taxpayer is entitled to a dependency exemption for each person that qualifies as a dependent. So, we've covered the exemptions. So, there are two types, as we discussed, personal and dependency. And now we're talking about how you can get dependency exemptions. That's by claiming dependents. And there are two types of dependents. You have a qualifying child and you have a qualifying relative. Now take note, qualifying child does not mean only child, as we'll see. And when we do relative, relative does not only mean someone who's actually related to you. So tax terms are not always going to correspond to the term you would find in a dictionary. So a qualifying child. The first thing I want to point out is that when you learn qualifying child, do know that it's going to carry over to other things, because in addition to providing a dependency exemption, a qualifying child may also provide additional benefits to taxpayers, such as head of household filing status and various other credits. However, the requirements for these additional benefits may be a little bit different, and then when we look at these topics, we're going to look at these requirements to see if they're exactly the same as the qualifying child, or if there's an additional requirement, or if it's less stringent. So, but just know that it will carry forward. So it's very important to know the requirements for the qualifying child, and there are 4 requirements that need to be met by the qualifying child to be claimed as a dependent. There are 2 additional requirements we're going to look at later, but these 4 right here that you see in blue, these 4 are unique to qualifying child. When we look at qualifying relative, we're going to look at 3 requirements, and those are unique to qualifying relative. In addition to that, there are 2 other requirements that are common between qualifying child and qualifying relative. So in total, there are actually 6 requirements. These 4 and 2 additional we're going to cover later. But just know for now that while we do these 4, that there are 2 additional that we're going to look at later. So let's start with the relationship test. So the very first test is the qualifying child has to be related to this taxpayer in one of these manners. So it could be, below the taxpayer, their son, daughter, stepchild, adopted child, foster child, or a descendant of any of those relationships, or grandson, granddaughter, and so on and so forth. Then you have relationships on the same level. You have brother, sister, half brother, half sister, and stepbrother, or the descendant of any of those. So again, we're going to their sons and daughters and granddaughters. So a niece or a nephew also qualifies. So I just added these here because a lot of people ask, what about cousins? The cousins are not a qualified relationship, so they would not qualify for this test. Also keep in mind that anyone above the taxpayer, parents, uncle, aunts, again, because it's not listed here, I just want to make an emphasis, they are also not included in this relationship test. It's pretty much only the individuals listed here, and anyone that you can imply or deduce the relationship through the descendant relationship. Now, an easy way to think of this is think of the relationship at the taxpayer's level and those below, but immediate relationship. So at the taxpayer's level, you have brother, sister, stepbrother, stepsister, and below. So it would be their sons and daughters, and then your sons, the taxpayer's sons and daughters, and their children and their grandchildren. Next test is the age test. Now, take note of this, as of the last day of the tax year. As of the last day. So let's say the child was 10 years old and their birthday is on December 31, then they turn 11 on the last day of tax year. They're considered 11 years old for that tax year. So on the last day of tax year, a child has to be one of the following: either under the age of 19, or under the age of 24 and a full-time student, or they could be any age if they're permanently and totally disabled. Now, notice this, it says under the age of 19. So if as of the last day of tax year, as of the last day of the tax year, the child qualifying child is 19, they do not qualify because it has to be under 19. Here, if they're 24 as of the last day of tax year, they do not qualify. They have to be below 24. So basically, if someone is a full-time student, they basically get an additional 4 years, actually an additional 5 years that they can still be qualified as a dependent. And if they're totally and permanently disabled, then the age doesn't matter. They could be, they will meet this test as long as they're permanently and totally disabled. Now, you will want to look into what this means when you're doing your reading. What is permanently and totally disabled, and what is a full-time student? Because as I said, just because you think something means a child, you think child is someone below, but as we just saw, it could be brother or sister. Same thing. You want to look and see what a full-time student is and what permanently and totally disabled is. Let me do a slideshow actually. Alright, so now let's look at the next one, which is the abode test. The child must live with the taxpayer for more than half the year. First of all, the word abode means like residence, place where people live together, for example. So the abode test is residence test. Are they living together? Child must. When I say child, I mean qualifying child again, because this could again be brother, sister, or their nieces and nephews, their children. So whenever you see child in these slides, it's qualifying child. Qualifying child must live the tax year for more than half of the year. So 6 months, more than 6 months. Do note that death and birth is treated as full year. So what do I mean by that? If a child is born on December 31st of 2015, they lived with the parent for the more than 6 months? No, they have not. But they still get treated as if they had. So if someone is born within the year, they're treated as if they live with the taxpayer the full year. Same thing if they die. So let's say someone dies on January 1, 2015. They only live with the taxpayer for 1 day, but they're still treated as having lived for the full year. So take note of this. Another thing is temporary absences. So if the taxpayer and the qualifying child are away from each other for temporary absences, which is for any of these reasons, they're considered to have lived together for that period of time. So if someone is away for illness, education, business, vacation, or military service, they're considered to have spent that time together. So let's say a child is away at the hospital for 3 months. Those 3 months are going to count as if the child and the taxpayer lived together. Now it's important to notice as temporary absences, so there has to be an intention to come back after. So if a child is overseas for education and they're going to come back eventually after they finish education, that's okay. They can be away for the whole year for education and they will satisfy this test. But if the child never plans to come back, they're there for education and they're married there, they have a job there, then they will not be satisfying this test. Next test is a support test. The child must not provide more than half of his or her own support. Again, when I say child, I mean qualifying child. Notice it says so the burden here is on the child not providing their support. It doesn't say anything about the taxpayer providing the support. So what I say is think of it as a negative support test where the child not providing more than 50% of his or her support meets the requirement. Again, the emphasis is on the qualifying child not supporting themselves. The taxpayer who's claiming them doesn't actually even have to support them. They could provide 1% of support or they could provide no support because it says nothing about the taxpayer supporting. It just says that the qualifying child does not fully support them. And it's important. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because when we look at the qualifying relative, the emphasis is actually on the taxpayer. So for qualifying child, the support requirement says the qualifying child cannot support themselves, which is providing more than 50% of their support. A quick note before we end is that it is possible that multiple people can qualify to claim the same child as a dependent. When this happens, there's a tiebreaker rule used. It just gives priority of who can claim the child first. So if there's two people, one is a parent and one is a grandparent, the parent gets first priority. So just to get those tiebreaker rules, you can look at publication 17 or publication 4012.